Cannery Row, Chapter 23, Part 1 of Chapter 23. A black gloom settled over the palace flophouse. All the joy went out of it. Mac came back from the laboratory with his mouth torn and his teeth broken. As a kind of penance, he did not wash his face. He went to his bed and pulled his blanket over his head, and he didn't get up all day. His heart was as bruised as his mouth. He went over all the bad things he had done in his life, and everything he had ever done seemed bad. He was very sad. Hughie and Jones sat for a while staring into space, and then morosely they went over to the Hediondo Cannery and applied for jobs and got them. Hazel felt so bad that he walked to Monterey and picked a fight with a soldier and lost it on purpose. That made him feel a little better to be utterly beaten by a man Hazel could have licked without half trying. Darling was the only happy one of the whole club. She spent the day under Mac's bed, happily eating up his shoes. She was a clever dog, and her teeth were very sharp. Twice, in his black despair, Mac reached under the bed and caught her and put her in bed with him for company, but she squirmed out and went back to eating his shoes. Eddie mooned on down to La Ida and talked to his friend, the bartender. He got a few drinks and borrowed some nickels with which he played Melancholy Baby 5 times on the jukebox. Mac and the boys were under a cloud, and they knew it, and they knew they deserved it. They had become social outcasts. All of their good intentions were forgotten now. The fact that the party was given for Doc, if it was known, was never mentioned or taken into consideration. The story ran through the Bear Flag. It was told in the canneries. At La Ida, drunks discussed it virtuously. Li Chong refused to comment. He was feeling financially bruised. And the story, as it grew, went this way. They had stolen liquor and money. They had maliciously broken into the laboratory and systematically destroyed it out of pure malice and evil. People who really knew better took this view. Some of the drunks at La Ida considered going over and beating the hell out of the whole lot of them to show them they couldn't do a thing like that to Doc. Only a sense of the solidarity and fighting ability of Mac and the boys saved them from some kind of reprisal. There were people who felt virtuous about the affair who hadn't had the material of virtue for a long time. The fiercest of the whole lot was Tom Shelligan, who would have been at the party if he had known about it. Socially, Mac and the boys were beyond the pale. Sam Malloy didn't speak to them as they went by the boiler. They drew into themselves, and no one could foresee how they would come out of the cloud. For there are 2 possible reactions to social ostracism. Either a man emerges determined to be better, purer, and kindlier, or he goes bad, challenges the world, and does even worse things. This last is by far the commonest reaction to stigma. Mac and the boys balanced on the scales of good and evil. They were kind and sweet to Darling. They were forbearing and patient with one another. When the first reaction was over, they gave the palace flophouse a cleaning such as it never had had. They polished the bright work on the stove, and they washed all their clothes and blankets. Financially, they had become dull and solvent. Hughie and Jones were working and bringing home their pay. They bought groceries up the hill at the thrift market because they could not stand the reproving eyes of Li Chong. It was during this time that Doc made an observation which may have been true, but since there was one factor missing in his reasoning, it is not known whether he was correct. It was the 4th of July. Doc was sitting in the laboratory with Richard Frost. They drank beer and listened to a new album of Scarlatti and looked out the window. In front of the palace flophouse, there was a large log of wood where Mac and the boys were sitting in the mid-morning sun. They faced down the hill toward the laboratory. Doc said, "Look at them. There are your true philosophers. I think," he went on, "that Mac and the boys know everything that has ever happened in the world and possibly everything that will happen. I think they survive in this particular world better than other people. In a time when people tear themselves to pieces with ambition and nervousness and covetousness, they are relaxed. All of our so-called successful men are sick men with bad stomachs and bad souls. But Mac and the boys are healthy and curiously clean. They can do what they want. They can satisfy their appetites without calling them something else." This speech so dried out Doc's throat that he drained his beer glass. He waved 2 fingers in the air and smiled. "There's nothing like that first taste of beer," he said. Richard Frost said, "I think they're just like anyone else. They just haven't any money." "Oh, they could get it," Doc said. "They could ruin their lives and get money. Mac has qualities of genius. They're all very clever if they want something. They just know the nature of things too well to be caught in that wanting." If Doc had known of the sadness of Mac and the boys, he would not have made the next statement, but no one had told him about the social pressure that was exerted against the inmates of the palace. He poured beer slowly into his glass. "I think I can show you proof," he said. "You see how they are sitting facing this way? Well, in about half an hour, the 4th of July parade is going to pass on Lighthouse Avenue. By just turning their heads, they can see it. By standing up, they can watch it. And by walking 2 short blocks, they can be right beside it. Now, I'll bet you a quart of beer, they won't even turn their heads." "Suppose they don't," said Richard Frost. "What will that prove?" "What will it prove?" cried Doc. "Why, just that they know what will be in the parade. They will know that the mayor will ride first in an automobile with bunting streaming back from the hood. Next will come Long Bob on his white horse with the flag, then the city council, then 2 companies of soldiers from the Presidio, next the Elks with purple umbrellas, then the Knights Templar in white ostrich feathers and carrying swords, next the Knights of Columbus with red ostrich feathers and carrying swords. Mac and the boys know that. The band will play. They've seen it all. They don't have to look again." "The man doesn't live who doesn't have to look at a parade," said Richard Frost. "Is it a bet, then?" "It's a bet."